Love, Lost, Rebirth, Alive, Blue Dolphins. The novel, by Makāula Nakae. Chapter 1, Boy Meets Boys. Episode 4, Song for the Lonely. On Friday night, Hanalei hailed a taxi and left his home in the mountainside neighborhood of Kāhala for the neon lights of Waikīkī. Kāhala is a prestigious residential enclave starting just beyond the silhouette of Leahy, Diamond Head, while the beach side is lined with some of the most expensive luxury estates on Oahu. Hanalei's condo sat tucked against the mountains. It was far enough that the bustling tourist hub was a world away, and with the hourly direct bus service already ended for the night, a taxi was his only bridge to the city. As the car swept past Diamond Head and turned onto Ala Wai Boulevard, the flickering lights of high-rise condos mirrored off the water and blurred past Hanalei's window. This stretch of road flanked the Ala Wai Canal, a feat of engineering that had fundamentally rewritten the DNA of the land. Before the concrete and the high-rises, Waikīkī was a vast wetland, a lush expanse of marshes and taro patches. It was a place of deep spiritual significance, housing ancient Hawaiian burial grounds and sacred sites. Several hea once stood here, including Luakini Hea, the most sacred of temples where significant rituals and sacrifices were performed to the god Ku. As the god of war and sacrifice, Ku held a dual nature. While he represented the fierce power required for battle, he was also associated with healing and the protection of the land. The blood once spilled on these sacred sites was meant to maintain the balance of the islands, a stark contrast to the blood-borne fears currently haunting the men in the clubs above. Hanalei looked out the taxi window, watching the neon signs reflect in the dark waters of the Ala Wai. He wondered if the tourists dancing in the nightclubs realized they were moving over ground that had once been a gateway to the gods. The modern world had paved over the taro patches and the burial sites, but as the car hummed toward the heart of the city, the air felt thick, as if the ancient spirits were still there, breathing beneath the asphalt, waiting to be acknowledged. The construction of the Ala Wai Canal in the 1920s drained the wetlands, forcing the water currents toward Ala Moana and effectively drying out the swamp. This transformation paved the way for Waikīkī to become a prominent global destination. From the era of grand golden ship luxury cruises to the arrival of the Pan American Clippers, tourists were carried across the Pacific to taste the magic of this tropical paradise, now lined with a shimmering wall of hotels, shops, and restaurants that stood atop the echoes of the past. The rainy season in Hawaii, known for its persistent nighttime showers that linger until dawn, was finally drawing to a close. With the clearing skies, the sleepless energy of Waikīkī was returning. While the luxury storefronts of Kalakaua Avenue remained relatively quiet, Kuhio Avenue, the gritty, bustling artery where city buses run until the early hours, was alive with movement. In the heart of this district, on the ground floor of a prominent office building, sat a nightclub once legendary for its opulent decor called Maharaja. Just above it, on the second floor, another club pulsed with a different rhythm. Even past midnight, this corner remained a hive of activity, with long lines of people stretching down the sidewalk, waiting to cross the threshold into the noise and heat of the night. Hanalei climbed the stairs to Angles, a gay bar in the center of Waikīkī, and found it just starting to get crowded. He looked around to see if he recognized anyone, but he found no familiar faces. Since he rarely frequented bars or clubs, he had few acquaintances in this high-energy world. Wanting to avoid the crush of the crowd, he found a spot alone at the edge of the balcony. He casually lit a cigarette and watched the scene unfold below, the men pacing the floor with intent, the cars passing by in a stream of red and white lights, and the tourists strolling along the sidewalks of nighttime Waikīkī, blissfully unaware of the ancient ground beneath their feet. Manao, a local Japanese man, had been tracking Hanalei's silhouette from across the room. Noticing the younger man's seemingly lonely figure, Manao peeled off his camouflage tank top, revealing a slim, toned physique characterized by a tight waist and sharply defined abs. He flashed a friendly smile, but beneath the practiced warmth lived the instincts of a hunter, a hunger for his next prey to satisfy a temporary sexual craving. Manao possessed a rare, beautifully sculpted nose for a Japanese man, and his chiseled cheeks featured a faint, elegant line. His wide-set double eyelids were so perfect they could be mistaken for plastic surgery by anyone who didn't know his original face. With his consciously sculpted features, he resembled a petite, wild beast. It was a look curated with intent. His ex-boyfriend was one of the most well-known plastic surgeons on Oahu. Feigning a simple trip to the bar for a drink, he shook his semi-long hair, letting the soft waves catch the club light, and drifted toward the unfamiliar young man at the balcony's edge. "Hello, haven't we met somewhere before?" Manao asked, his voice dripping with an easy, effortless friendliness. In the high-stakes theater of the Waikīkī night, an opening like this was a necessary shield. If one didn't master the art of the approach, the reactions from strangers could be brutal, cold rejections that left a man feeling compromised or beaten down from within. Manao had learned long ago that to survive the scene, you had to become the one who set the pace, turning every interaction into a game where he held the high ground. Hanalei turned to the small-statured man, offering a friendly smile that lacked the guarded cynicism common in the room. "I don't think so," he replied faintly. Manao didn't flinch. He leaned against the railing, his toned shoulder just inches from Hanalei's, insisting he must have seen him somewhere before. Hanalei, being polite, introduced himself and they shook hands. "You look like a local Japanese guy," Hanalei said with a casual laugh. "So how come you have a Hawaiian name?" In the local tongue, Manao is a weighty word, encompassing thought, idea, belief, or the deep act of reflection. It is the sharing of one's inner intentions. "Actually, my name is Japanese," Manao explained, his predatory edge softening slightly into surprise. "My grandmother told me it means center of truth. I didn't even realize it was a Hawaiian word." Hanalei switched seamlessly, replying in broken Japanese, "So desu ka, wakarimashita, I see, I understand." Manao's eyebrows shot up, his sculpted features registering genuine shock. "Wow, you speak Japanese too." "A little," Hanalei responded modestly, mixing the languages of the islands. "Pono liai, just a tiny bit." While Hanalei was talking with Manao at the edge of the lanai, a roofed, open-sided porch, he felt the prickle of a steady gaze. Looking past Manao's shoulder, he saw Jim ascending the stairs. Manao, ever the predator, caught the shift in Hanalei's focus immediately. He turned his head, his sharp eyes narrowing as they landed on Jim. He could sense an invisible thread of claim, or at least intent, stretching between the two men. In this scene, you didn't look at someone that way unless you were already circling them. "Do you know him?" Manao asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Who are you talking about?" "Jim. You see the tall, muscular local Japanese guy with the bleached hair who just came in?" Manao casually nudged Hanalei's arm, pointing him out. Hanalei met Jim's eyes, a faint smile touching his lips as he offered a light wave. "Yeah, I met him at the beach yesterday. He invited me to swim," Hanalei replied, his attention drifting back to the floor where half-naked men pulsed in unison to the melodic trance beats echoing through the room. "Oh, you know him." Manao gave Jim a sharp, sidelong glance. It was an assertive look, a silent challenge that served as the standard aloha in this world. Here, every greeting was a tactical move in a landscape that shifted between a romantic resort and a ruthless battlefield. Jim co-owned a prestigious hair salon in Ala Moana, while Manao worked as a nail technician at a smaller boutique nearby. Their history stretched back to the early 80s when they both taught aerobics at the YMCA, a time of neon spandex and high-energy music. In a sense, they were perpetual competitors, clashing in both the beauty industry and the social hierarchy of the Waikīkī night. Having known each other since they were teenagers, They had long ago realized their personalities were like oil and water. They weren't openly hostile, just fundamentally incompatible. So, he's your business rival. He looks good, but he's not my type, Hanalei said with a shrug of indifference. Ha ha ha. I'm sure you're not his type either. Manao laughed loudly, the sound a bit too sharp for the space. Hanalei pulled a funny face and shrugged it off. What do you want to drink? It's on me. Buying a drink was a way for Hanalei to settle into the room. Sharing a drink while remaining emotionally alone allowed him to feel anchored without being beholden to anyone. To him, buying a round wasn't an invitation for a night of white linen. It was a polite boundary. Besides, Manao was miles away from the person Hanalei truly desired, a person who, perhaps, didn't even exist in this world. Really? Then a tequila shot, Manao replied. As Manao spoke, Hanalei watched him closely, noting the subtle shift in the man's energy. He noticed a slight jitter in Manao's muscles, and the dilated, wandering focus of his eyes, which seemed to catch every glint of the club's lighting. He suspected Manao was under the influence of ecstasy. Unlike the wild beast persona he had projected moments ago, the chemical was beginning to soften him. The aggressive hunter was being replaced by a hazy, euphoric warmth. Manao's movements became more fluid, almost rhythmic, as he drifted toward a state of tactile longing. It was the fuel of the era, turning the sharp edges of the night into something blurred and snuggly, allowing these men to dance in a collective trance until dawn while their spirits floated in a sea of artificial affection. Hanalei ordered a tequila shot for Manao and a Budweiser for himself from a young white bartender. The man gave Hanalei a meaningful wink, a silent, appreciative appraisal, before turning to the shelves lined with countless liquor bottles. He expertly poured the gold liquid into a shot glass and filled a red plastic cup with a cold beer. In the ecosystem of the Waikīkī night, many of the white bartenders, the haole, were rice queens. They were men drawn specifically to the bronze shades of Polynesians or the features of Asian men. Had they preferred their own reflection, they likely wouldn't have carved out a life in the middle of the Pacific. Handing the tequila shot to Manao, Hanalei leaned in and whispered, "Are you on something?" "Yeah," Manao replied, his voice sounding breathy as the euphoria began to wash over him. "If you want some, I've got extra. It's white dove, really good stuff." He offered it with a wide, dilated gaze, the drug making him feel an artificial closeness to everyone in his immediate radius. "Not tonight. Honestly, my body can't handle drugs that often," Hanalei said. It wasn't just a polite excuse. It was a boundary he lived by. He knew exactly what those chemicals did to his heart rate and his recovery time in the water, and he preferred the natural clarity of the Pacific over a pill-induced haze. He took a slow sip of his beer, his eyes drifting back to the rhythmic motion of the dance floor, but now didn't push it. With the ecstasy peaking, he felt a restless, tactile energy. Recognizing that Jim's looming presence at the top of the stairs had effectively ended any chance of a deeper connection here, he began to scan the room with a wandering, hungry focus. He needed a different source of warmth, a different body to lean against. "I'll be wandering around and then head to Fusion next door. Let's meet up later," Manao said, tossing back the last of his tequila shot. He began weaving through the crowded dance floor, his movements loose and rhythmic as he headed toward the door of the adjacent club. Seeing his opening, Jim grabbed his drink from the counter and navigated the space toward the lanai. He reached out, placing a hand gently on Hanalei's chin, and gave him a light, practiced kiss on both cheeks. "Aloha, beautiful. How's your night going?" The word beautiful hung in the air with a certain polished weight. To Hanalei, it sounded artificial, the kind of practiced compliment Jim likely handed out a dozen times a day to the socialites in his salon chair. "Hello. It's good. How about you?" Hanalei replied. Despite the polite response, Jim caught the subtle misalignment. In his line of work, reading a client's mood was as vital as the cut itself. He was trained to sense when a smile was merely a mask for exhaustion or a wandering mind. He could tell Hanalei wasn't entirely there, but he chose not to press. He knew better than to challenge a mood that was already drifting toward the exit. Not bad. I just got here. It's crowded tonight, Jim said, his friendliness shining brighter and more upbeat than it had at the beach. In the cruising grounds of the night, people shift their personas like chameleons, swapping masks to suit the environment. When you are on the hunt, your mind becomes a high-speed processor, trying to grasp every look, every whisper, and every potentiality. In that rush to absorb information, words can often become shallow, placeholders for the deeper, unspoken intentions of the playground. Of course, I remember, Hanalei replied. His voice was weak, trailing off in a way that prompted Jim to quickly pivot. Are you here with friends? Jim asked. It was the standard opening gambit, the move everyone makes to gauge the competition and see who they are racing against. Friends? Oh, you mean Manao. He's cruising around. You know him, right? Jim's expression flickered at the mention of the name. He took a slow sip of his beer, maintaining a smile, but his internal guard went up. Though they shared a Japanese heritage and a long history in the beauty scene, Jim kept his distance. He had heard too many stories about Manao's erratic outbursts and his trail of unstable, short-lived relationships. A little, yeah, Jim replied. This island's small, you know. Everyone slept with everyone's ex. It was the reality of the community in this paradise. The gay scene was an intricate, overlapping web where gossip served as the primary currency. In a place where the nightlife could often feel repetitive, rumors, both vicious and kind, traveled from the west side to the east in a single night, carried by the trade winds of conversation. As they talked, the club's atmosphere shifted. The heavy driving trance began to morph into the shimmering synths of high-energy pop remixes. Then, the unmistakable, vocoded opening of Cher's latest anthem filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards. Hanalei's feet began to move, a light, rhythmic stepping that seemed entirely instinctual. He quietly hummed along to the lyrics that were quickly becoming the soundtrack of the decade. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me tonight? I love this song, Hanalei said, his voice regaining some of its strength as the music took hold of him. Loving Cher makes it obvious you're gay. Jim laughed. It was the ultimate cliché, yet it rang true. This wasn't the Cher of the past, the one wearing a studded black leather jacket and a high-cut bodysuit, striding in black boots to robust rock beats. She had shed that if I could turn back time image for something far more sophisticated with the release of One by One. Now she moved with a sleek, high-fashion, long bob wig, her voice transformed by the legendary American DJ and producer Junior Vasquez. At the Palladium in New York, Vasquez had reinvented her sound, turning her vocals into a shimmering, synthetic rallying cry that resonated deeply in a world still reeling after 9/11. Through his remixes, that voice had traveled across continents, eventually finding its way into this dark club in the middle of the Pacific. It united the dance floor under a single pulsing anthem, providing a sense of collective healing for a community that had seen too much loss. Hanalei closed his eyes as the Junior Vasquez Sound Factory beat took over. The heavy tribal drums felt like the deep rhythmic thrum of the tide against a reef. In this moment, the artificial lights of Waikīkī faded, and he was back in the water, guided only by the melody and the pulse of a world that felt both ancient and brand new. Jim looked at Hanalei, really looked at him, and for the first time that night, the artificial stylist mask slipped. Hanalei returned the gaze with a warm, intimate smile, the kind that didn't belong in a cruising playground, but in a place far more real. Let's dance, Jim said. Hanalei was somewhat surprised by Jim's sudden approach, but felt a surge of relief at the invitation. He looked up playfully, a spark of mischief in his eyes, before following Jim toward the booming trance beat of the crowded dance floor. Surveying the sea of half-naked men jumping and swaying in the heat, Hanalei took one last sip of his beer and placed the cup on a small table at the edge of the floor. He began to step lightly, his body finding the pulse of the melodic trance. The powerful, layered synth sounds provided that characteristic circuit energy, a wall of sound that gradually cleared his mind of distractions. The intense electronic drums allowed the surrounding reality to dissolve, leaving only the rhythm behind. The vibrant waves of light from the mirror ball fractured across the floor, intersecting with the occasional plumes of white dry ice smoke from the ceiling pipes. These thick, smoky clouds created a fantastical world, a temporary sanctuary detached from the outside world. Closing his eyes, Hanalei concentrated on the beat, his hands moving freely in the air. Once he was in sync, he could forget everything. Watching Hanalei dance beside him, Jim felt a sharp prickle of superiority. He had won, Manao had failed. Yet, as he watched, he realized that although Hanalei was right there, he seemed deeply immersed in a private universe, acknowledging no one else. His beautiful, sweat-slicked body moved with a fluid, muscular grace, but his solitary figure appeared as if he wanted to be utterly alone amidst the crowd. This beautiful new prey wouldn't easily fall into anyone's hands. He belonged to no one. A few men at the edge of the floor watched Hanalei, entranced by his trance-like state. They shifted their positions, trying to catch his eye or penetrate the line of his exotic South Seas gaze, but none succeeded. No one could exchange a glance with him, let alone a touch. On this crowded, pulsing floor, Hanalei was alone, and only the music was his partner. This is a song for the lonely. Can you hear me tonight? To be continued. Swim and listen to the historical gay drama in the center of the Pacific. We are releasing a brand new episode every single day until the epic conclusion of the story. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 15 to 45-minute hit of cinematic historical drama set in the tropical islands of Hawaii, the perfect daily plunge into the shattered world a millennium after 9/11. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full novel now. Bookmark Blue Dolphins. The Novel Playlist, A Great Argead Saga, Alexine, Volume 1, Talesius Playlist, Volume 2, Sacred Band Playlist, and Divine Oracle. Unwritten words behind my novel playlist. Subscribe to follow the waves and currents of Forbidden Paradise love tales. Comment below.